A wildlife crew in Blanco County, Texas, sat down to review routine trail camera footage from a hog eradication operation. Standard procedure, something they had done dozens of times before. They were expecting to see hogs destroying fields, hogs raiding feeders, maybe a failed trap or two. What they actually saw on that infrared footage made the room go completely silent, not because of the hogs, because of what was moving through the brush around the hogs in the dark. Something that had been happening the entire time, completely invisible to every eradication program, every helicopter team, every government agency, and every rancher who had spent years and fortunes trying to solve the single most expensive wildlife crisis in American history. And when they finally understood what they were looking at, it did not just change how they ran that one operation in Blanco County, it broke the entire playbook in half. Stay with me, because what happened in that brush at 2 in the morning is one of the most fascinating, most important, and most embarrassing wildlife discoveries in recent American history, and it has been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. Let us start with the problem, because you need to understand just how enormous this crisis actually is before the footage makes complete sense. Texas in 2026 is fighting a war it is losing. The enemy is the feral hog. According to the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute and the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, Texas is now carrying an estimated 3 million feral hogs spread across 253 of its 254 counties. The single exception is El Paso County, separated from the rest of the state by hundreds of miles of dry, harsh terrain that even these animals have not crossed yet. 3 million animals in one state. That is not a wildlife problem. That is an occupation, and the cost of that occupation is staggering. The most recent comprehensive data from the USDA's National Feral Swine Damage Management Program, published in 2025 and covering 13 states, puts the annual agricultural damage from feral hogs across just those states at $1.6 billion. $1.6 billion every single year. And that figure only covers 13 states out of the 35 or more where feral hogs have now been confirmed. Texas alone accounts for $871 million of that damage in a single year. Georgia adds another $152 million. Oklahoma adds $116 million on top of that. A Texas Farm Bureau report from March 2026 confirmed the destruction continues to grow daily, with ranchers describing damage to row crops, pastures, underground irrigation lines, and coastal Bermuda grass stands being ripped up completely and left unable to regenerate without total replowing. One farmer in Burleson County, named John Malazzo, told reporters in 2025 that hogs had destroyed 60 to 70 acres of his corn. He did the math out loud. 180 bushels of corn per acre at $4 a bushel. The numbers add up fast, and they add up every single season, year after year, with no end in sight. A rancher in Rosebud named Justin Allen described watching hogs root up his coastal Bermuda grass pastures, the foundation of his entire grazing operation, leaving ground so destroyed it was inoperable until completely plowed and reseeded. And when he did that, the hogs came right back and rerouted everything again within weeks. Now, here's the part that turns a bad situation into a mathematical nightmare. These animals do not just destroy property, they reproduce at a rate that makes every control method feel like trying to bail out a sinking boat with a teaspoon. A female feral hog can conceive as early as 6 months old. Her gestation period is 115 days. She can produce 2 to 3 litters every single year. Each litter can contain up to 12 piglets. Under the warm, food-rich conditions of the American South, a feral hog population can double in as few as 4 months. There's no natural ceiling in that math. The number only goes one direction. The American Farm Bureau Federation's economist Daniel Monk stated it plainly in a 2025 analysis. With reproductive rates that allow populations to double in as little as 4 months, their geographic range and damage footprint grow rapidly without intensive eradication efforts. And intensive eradication efforts, as Texas has learned the extremely expensive way, are not working. The history of how these animals got here matters, because it explains why they are so extraordinarily hard to stop. It started in the 1500s. Spanish explorers moving along the Gulf Coast released domestic pigs into the wild as living food reserves for future expeditions. The concept was straightforward. Release the pigs, return later, eat the pigs. What actually happened was those animals vanished into the forests of a continent that had no natural predators evolved to hunt them, no diseases capable of thinning their numbers, and an almost unlimited food supply. They spread, they bred, and they kept spreading. By the time anyone realized what was building out there in the brush, the population had already grown far beyond any reasonable hope of easy containment. Then in the early 1900s, wealthy Europeans began importing Eurasian wild boar into the United States, specifically for sport hunting on private reserves. These were not farm animals. Centuries of survival in the brutal terrain of Europe, hunted by wolves and humans for generations, had made them lean, fast, aggressive, and built for endurance. When those boar escaped their enclosures, and they always found a way out eventually, They met the feral descendants of the Spanish pigs that had already spread across the southern half of the continent. What came out of that crossbreeding was something worse than either parent species, a hybrid that combined the domestic pig's extraordinary reproductive speed and willingness to eat absolutely anything with the wild boar's aggression, intelligence, speed, and physical toughness. Stronger, smarter, more adaptable, and more destructive than anything North America had evolved to handle. The hybrids kept refining themselves over generations. The best breeders bred the most. The survivors of human hunting pressure were the most cautious, the most intelligent, the hardest to catch. And those were the animals passing on their genes. By 2026, the result is an animal that sprints at 30 miles per hour, clears 4-foot fences without slowing down, grows tusks past 6 inches long, carries skin over an inch thick in places, backed by a layer of cartilaginous plating across the shoulders and chest that turns light ammunition into something the animal barely notices. You need to know exactly where to hit one, and you need to be right on the first shot, because there is no second attempt with a wounded feral hog. And the intelligence. This is the part that makes wildlife managers lose sleep. A Harris County representative told reporters in early 2026 that once a hog knows a neighborhood or a property, it visits the same routes repeatedly and shares that knowledge. If a trap catches even one animal from a group and the rest escape, those survivors will never approach a similar structure again. They teach their offspring to avoid it. You get exactly one chance with any given group of hogs, and that window closes the moment even one of them gets away. The same county representative confirmed what every rancher in Texas already knew from bitter experience. Trapping efforts can sometimes make the problem worse. Spooked hogs are educated hogs, and educated hogs are nearly impossible to trap. The official response to all of this has been enormous in scale and largely ineffective in result. Over the past decade, the USDA Wildlife Services has spent over $100 million on feral hog control nationwide. States have run bounty programs. Helicopter hunting operations costing $20,000 per flight have swept across hundreds of thousands of acres. Cage traps baited with fermented corn. Professional removal crews working properties for days at a time. Hunting dog teams. Every tool available to every agency and every rancher thrown at this problem continuously. And still the population kept climbing. Still the damage bills kept rising. Still the hogs kept coming back. The reason the old methods never worked permanently is something that wildlife managers eventually had to admit out loud, though they rarely said it to the press. Aggressive hunting and trapping pressure does not reduce hog populations in a stable, lasting way. It scatters them. Hogs that survive a removal operation do not stay in the area and wait for the next one. They spread. They move into counties that were previously clear of hogs, establishing entirely new populations in areas where the animals had never been recorded before. Every helicopter flight that pushed a group off one property was essentially planting seeds across the wider region. And the harder the agencies pushed, the wider the spread became. It was like squeezing a balloon. Pressure in one place created bulges everywhere else. And the surviving animals were not random survivors. They were the ones who had been most cautious, most aware, most capable of evading the operation. Those were the animals that bred. Natural selection, driven directly by human hunting pressure, was producing a population of hogs that was measurably harder to catch with every passing generation. The agencies running eradication programs were, without intending to, running the most effective selective breeding program in American history, selecting for the smartest, most evasive, most dangerous animals, and making sure those were the ones that survived to reproduce. Nobody in any of the conference rooms or press releases wanted to say it, but the math was inescapable. $1.6 billion in annual agricultural damage, $100 million in federal spending over a decade, and the hog population kept growing. The old playbook was not just failing. In some ways, it was making things worse. And meanwhile, something completely different was happening out in the brush, something nobody had planned, nobody had funded, and nobody had even noticed. Starting around 2014, field researchers working the Texas Hill Country began finding something they could not immediately explain. Feral hog nests, the shallow beds in the brush where mother hogs shelter their newborn piglets during the first vulnerable days of life, were turning up emptied. Not raided by hunters, not sprung by traps, physically excavated and cleared. Nothing left but disturbed soil. No blood, no drag marks, no evidence of the kind of violent struggle you would expect from any predator large enough to challenge a 200-pound mother hog. Wildlife Services biologist Dr. Michael Bodenchuk crouched next to one of these destroyed nests one cold morning, frost still on the ground around him. He had 2 decades of field experience reading animal sign on the ground. He knew bear tracks. He knew mountain lion tracks. He knew what a large predator working a kill site looked like. What he found at the edges of this nest site was none of that. The tracks were small, compact, evenly spaced. He stayed crouched there much longer than he had planned to. He called his regional director before he even logged the sample, because the tracks at the edge of that destroyed hog nest belonged to a coyote. Think about what that means on paper. A coyote weighs around 30 pounds on a good day. A feral mother hog weighs 200 pounds, carries 6-inch tusks, has cartilaginous armor across her chest and shoulders, and can run 30 miles per hour. That is a 6-to-1 disadvantage in body weight before you factor in the tusks and the armor and the speed. A coyote directly attacking an adult feral hog makes about as much sense as a house cat attacking a German shepherd. On paper, it is not a contest. The hog wins, and the coyote does not get a second chance. But the trail cameras were telling a completely different story. The first significant infrared footage pulled from Blanco County showed coyotes moving through the brush at 2 in the morning. Not the scattered, opportunistic wandering behavior you expect from a scavenger looking for whatever died nearby. Formation movement, deliberate, coordinated, purposeful. The kind of approach pattern that looked less like a scavenger and more like a hunting team that had run this exact operation before and knew precisely how it was supposed to go. The lead coyote moved in low, ears barely above the grass line, approaching the nest from downwind so the mother hog could not pick up the scent. Behind it, 2 more coyotes moved into flanking positions on either side of the nest. When the mother hog left for even a few minutes to forage, the operation began. 1 coyote held position at the nest perimeter, watching for the mother's return. A second tested the position of the piglets. Then, in a synchronized burst, both flanking coyotes rushed the nest from 2 directions simultaneously. 1 precise bite to the back of the neck. The piglet went limp. It was dragged into the tree line before the mother completed her turn back toward the nest. The whole sequence took less than 5 seconds from the moment they moved to the moment they disappeared into the brush. 5 seconds. The mother hog came back to a nest that had simply lost 1 more piglet to nothing she could find. Nothing she could fight, nothing she could stop. This was not random opportunism. This was coordinated predation, practiced, refined, and operating at scale completely under the radar of every hog control program running in Texas. Laboratory confirmation came from Fort Hood, the massive military installation in central Texas that carries one of the densest feral hog populations on any federal property in the country. Researchers captured 18 coyotes from high-density hog territory and submitted them for necropsy. The examination team expected to find the standard coyote diet: rabbits, rodents, insects, occasional scavenged deer carcass material. What they found instead was startling enough that they ran the analysis a second time, just to be certain. Nearly a third of those coyotes had undigested tissue from feral hog piglets in their stomachs. Fresh tissue, not old material scavenged from a carcass someone else had killed days earlier. Actively hunted, freshly killed piglet remains consumed within hours of the kill. The tissue was intact enough to confirm species, approximate age of the prey, and method of death. These coyotes were not scavenging. They were hunting regularly, successfully, and in numbers suggesting this was not occasional behavior. It was a primary food source. Parallel data came from Georgia. Wildlife Services found piglet DNA in over 30% of coyote scat samples collected across the state. Not an occasional lucky find. Systematic generational predation operating across multiple states simultaneously, and it had been happening since at least 2014, over a decade. Right under the noses of every agency, every rancher, and every helicopter crew that had spent those same years focused on shooting, trapping, and chasing adult hogs. Here's the thing that makes the coyotes' method so remarkable. They never go after the adults. They cannot. A fully grown feral hog would destroy a coyote in seconds, and coyotes seem to understand this completely. So instead, they found a different angle, one that no human program had ever thought to target. They go after what comes next, the next generation, the breeding cycle itself, the piglets, in the brief window of vulnerability before they grow large enough to defend themselves. The technique is as close to military tactics as anything documented in a wild predator this size. Coyotes never engage the threat directly. Instead, a lead animal sprints past the edge of the nest, close enough to trigger panic, but too fast to catch. The piglets scatter. The mother hog, 200 pounds of fury, wheels around trying to determine which direction to charge, reacting to the decoy she can see while the real threat is coming from somewhere else entirely. While she is turning, the flanking coyotes lunge from either side. 1 bite, the piglet goes limp, and the coyote is back in tree cover before the mother even completes her rotation. By the time she returns to the nest, the coyotes are 300 yards away, moving through brush she cannot follow them into. What makes this even more extraordinary is when it happens. Most coyotes hunt at night, but specific coyote populations living in high-density hog territory have shifted their primary hunting window to early dawn, the exact period when mother hogs are most physically exhausted. After a full night of foraging and rooting, a mother hog is at her slowest, her most depleted, her least reactive. Her response time is measurably diminished in those early morning hours. The coyotes found that fatigue window and learned to use it with precision. That is not instinct. Instinct does not do that. That is learned behavior, passed from one generation to the next through observation, refined over years of trial and error until the technique became reliable enough to feed entire coyote populations through seasons and through droughts. Researchers at the time called it the most significant adaptive behavioral shift documented in a North American predator in decades, and ecologists believe the pressure that drove it was caused by humans. The systematic removal of the coyote's traditional prey, rabbits, rodents, small animals, through land development and habitat destruction, forced entire coyote populations across the American South to innovate or face starvation. Right next to them, in numbers almost beyond counting, was the biggest surplus prey source on the continent, unguarded piglets, millions of them, completely overlooked by every predator in the ecosystem and practically invisible to every hog control program running in any state. The coyotes did not overlook them, and the data shows it is working. In parts of Texas, documented piglet losses to coyote predation have doubled over the last decade. In parts of Oklahoma and Georgia, feral hog populations have declined by 20% in areas of sustained coyote activity. No traps deployed, no helicopters in the air, no humans firing a single shot. The land was doing something that $1 billion in human effort had failed to do. In East Texas specifically, more than 30% of piglets disappear every breeding season. When researchers began overlaying the coyote density maps against the piglet mortality maps, the alignment was not approximate. It was exact. Every zone of high coyote density corresponded precisely with zones of elevated piglet mortality. A healthy, undisturbed coyote population was accomplishing what $1.6 billion in annual agricultural damage and $100 million in federal control spending could not. It was hitting the hog population at the only point in the life cycle where it actually matters. Not the adults, the next generation. Here is where the embarrassment comes in. While this natural correction was quietly building momentum in the Texas brush, the government had spent years actively destroying it. From 2017 to 2020, multiple states offered bounty payments of up to $75 for every coyote brought in dead. Hunters collected those bounties by the thousands, and in at least one Texas county where coyotes were reduced by over 60% through targeted removal programs, the feral hog population tripled within 3 years. 3 years. The county had spent money to eliminate the one biological force that was actually applying meaningful pressure to hog numbers at the generational level, and then watched its hog problem triple in direct response. The bounty programs were not a solution to the hog crisis. They were fuel added to it. While ranchers were spending their savings on traps, helicopter flights, and professional removal crews, and while federal agencies were burning through their budgets on eradication programs that produced temporary results at best, the coyote had been running its own correction operation in the dark, free of charge, 7 nights a week, in every weather condition, targeting the precise vulnerability that determines the future of a hog population. And every $75 bounty paid to a hunter for a dead coyote was cutting the brake line on the one mechanism that was genuinely working. The good news is that this revelation, once it was understood, began to change things. Texas has since moved toward a coordinated multi-method strategy that for the first time formally includes protecting coyote populations in high-density hog regions. Smart traps now line the perimeters of working ranches across the state. Not wooden cage traps from a farm supply store, but units fitted with infrared cameras, solar power panels, and wireless connections to phone applications. A rancher can sit on his couch at 11 at night, pull up a live feed of his property, and watch in real time as a group of hogs wanders into the enclosure. He waits until every animal in the group is inside. Then he presses a single button and drops the gate on all of them simultaneously. That detail matters more than it sounds. Feral hogs are intelligent enough that if you trap half a group and leave the other half free, the survivors will never approach a similar structure again. They teach their offspring to avoid it. So the goal is never to catch some of them. The goal is to catch all of them in a single moment, leaving no survivors to spread the memory of what happened. Some ranchers have learned to play an even longer game. They leave traps standing wide open for 2 full weeks, with bait scattered inside and no trigger active. The hogs enter, eat, and return. They bring others. They bring piglets. Over 14 days, they lose every shred of suspicion about the structure. Then, on a night when cameras show 30 or 40 animals inside at once, the gate drops. The entire group taken in one moment. Texas has also begun field testing specialized toxins, delivered through feeders engineered to require the specific physical strength of a hog to open, keeping deer, raccoons, and every other non-target animal completely safe. Communities across rural Texas are now pooling resources to buy shared trapping systems covering multiple properties simultaneously, because hogs do not respect property lines, and individual ranchers, fighting them alone, never had a chance. In Atascosa County, a coalition of ranchers combining smart traps with coyote-friendly land management saw crop losses fall from 600 acres of destroyed corn annually to nearly zero. The Texas model is now being studied by wildlife agencies in Australia and New Zealand, where invasive feral pig populations are producing their own version of the same crisis. But here is what every serious researcher in this field now understands, even if not everyone says it at the podium. No trap replaces what the coyotes do. No helicopter matches their efficiency. No toxin operates 7 nights a week in every weather condition, targeting the exact point in the hog life cycle that determines the future of the entire population. The adults were never the target that mattered. It was never the adults. It is the next generation. Every adult hog killed in a helicopter operation costs $20,000 per flight and is replaced by the next litter before the month is out. Every piglet taken by a coyote in a 5-second operation costs nothing and removes one future breeding animal from the population permanently. What the Blanco County footage actually revealed was not a threat. It was an answer. The answer that had been running its own operation in the hill country for over a decade while every rancher, every agency, and every government program burned through resources looking in exactly the wrong direction. The most effective tool against the most destructive and most expensive invasive species in American history was not a bullet. It was not a trap, a helicopter, a toxin, or a federal bounty program. It was the animal that every one of those programs had been spending decades and millions of dollars trying to eliminate. The 30-pound scavenger that everyone underestimated. The predator that adapted quietly, generation by generation, in the dark, developing a level of coordinated tactical hunting behavior that no government agency had achieved with all of its technology and all of its funding. The coyote found the one true vulnerability in a species that had defeated every human strategy thrown at it, and it exploited that vulnerability with a precision and a consistency that no eradication program had ever come close to matching. Not from above, not with technology, not with a budget, from the brush, in the dark, 5 seconds at a time. The footage proved it was happening. The laboratory data proved it was working. The overlapping maps proved it was scaling across multiple states simultaneously, without any human coordination, without any funding, without a single press release or field briefing. And the only question that remains, now that the cameras finally caught it and the researchers finally understood what they were seeing, is whether the people running these programs are willing to stop destroying the answer they spent a decade accidentally dismantling. The hog crisis in America is not over. 3 million animals in Texas alone. $871 million in damage in a single year in a single state. Population still spreading into new counties, new suburbs, new neighborhoods. This problem does not have an easy ending. But the footage from Blanco County showed something that changes how the next chapter gets written. Nature had already built a correction mechanism into the system. It was running quietly and effectively the entire time. The only thing ever stopping it from working at full scale was us.